Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Oh, that's a great question. I hope all of those, all of the above. Definitely, that's what I was looking for when I wrote the book. It's a history book, like an adventure book, really, about a forgotten piece of World War II history. But through that, I'm trying to tell the story of how one subverts, very nasty propaganda. I mean, Delma's case, he was subverting Nazi propaganda, but obviously we have particularly, somehow sort of, different, but still related forms of very nasty authoritarian propaganda today. So trying to draw some lessons, because there are things that repeat across history. Kind of make the point that democracies have actually been quite good at fighting these very nasty strains of propaganda in the past. We've sort of lost our ability to do so because, we had several decades of peace. So I kind of wanted to sort of give a kick up the arse to democratic forces, because Delma really faced a lot of the same frustrations that we see today. Liberal Democrats preaching to the converted, stuck in their own echo chamber, really not doing anything to undermine the relationship between authoritarian leaders and their publics, which was what Delma was focused on. And then, but on a deeper level than that, it's very much about what is the need for propaganda that we all have? Where is the line between your personality and the one that propaganda sort of gives you? When are we truly free? So asking those sort of questions, more universal ones at a lower level. I kind of stumbled into, the fact that propaganda was changing. And I wrote my first book about Putin's propaganda. I wrote that before it was fashionable. My first book came out in like 13 or 14. I remember now, probably 14. And over a decade ago. And then I just went on a journey, like trying to work out what's going on across the world, looking at history, writing a short book now about how to fight propaganda. So I just happened to be in the epicenter of it. So that was kind of my personal sequence of events. But I think the reason I'm drawn to it, which I have been thinking about, like having written 4 books about it, having sort of like, I teach many courses about it at Johns Hopkins University. I work with various sort of civic organizations and media to think what we can do about it, and so it's sort of become like the focus of my life, my professional life. And I suppose really what I'm interested in deep down is this question of when are you yourself, just on quite existential level. Propaganda is just a way of provoking questions about your personality, your individuality, your role in society. When are you, and when are you being dictated to by others? And I'm not of a conspiratorial bent. I don't believe all this sort of rhetoric about hidden manipulators. I don't think that's how anything works. If anything, that's a very effective job by propagandists to convince people they're that powerful. But on a much deeper level, we do all swim in this sea of personas and language and culture that is constantly being tweaked and adapted and manipulated by propagandists. And we're in a constant kind of dramatic interplay with it. But so that's kind of what fascinates me personally. But the imperative right now is to work out what the bad guys are doing and win. So, there might be kind of a personal fascination with some of the existential themes of propaganda, but there's also a very live political one. I mean, I've seen a very similar strain of authoritarian propaganda kind of sweep across the world. I first saw it rise in Russia. Then I saw it kind of, when I moved back to London, saw it sort of sweep over Britain and partly manifest itself in Brexit. Now I live in the US, and, I've written about this problem across the world. I don't think I've actually been in a society as afflicted as the US in terms of the effects of propaganda. In Russia, there's a lot of cynicism involved. People were playing along that they believed the Kremlin because it was dangerous not to. In America, well, you have at least 30% of society that by all polling lives in a completely alternative reality. And of course, the most dangerous part is that they're in power. So we're in some serious gaslighting territory now, as I'm sure everybody knows. Well, no, I mean, sadly, it doesn't work like that at all. I mean, so you're talking about conspiracy theories, for example. It's not really got to do with education, but in the polling that I've done, which wasn't in America, it was elsewhere, it's not particularly connected to education in the first place, and definitely not to intelligence. But if anything, the people most prone to conspiratorial thinking are people with 2 PhDs. And that repeats over and over. Just think of the 9/11 bombers. They're all like incredibly well-educated people. Actually, it's the other way around. Like when I've looked at cults and stuff, which is also a form of propaganda, it's actually people who are a little bit foreigners, for example, who have problems with the language, who you could say are a bit slow that way. That because clever propaganda is using the way you think. So the more you think, the more engaged you are, the more likely you are to be pulled in. So no, I don't think there's much of a correlation between sort of intelligence, IQ, and propaganda. It's got to do with psychology and personal background and needs. And we see this over and over in study after study. People who are incredibly well educated will repeat lies if they confirm their kind of like tribal values or whatever. And then the brain is always playing tricks on us. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are. The brain is always looking for shortcuts and confirmation biases and all sorts of things that make life very easy for the propagandist. So no, I don't think it's got much to do with that. I think it's got to do with social crises of identity. That's clearly a very big deal. Sense of a loss of status, all kinds of vulnerabilities. But I don't think it's got much to do with or directly to do with sort of like intelligence or IQ. It's a good question. I don't think disinformation is a very useful term. It's a very narrow part of influence. It's sort of like purposeful lies. That's with the intent to deceive. I mean, that's a tiny bit of the issue that we're looking at. I think often it's sort of used because people don't want to look at the larger problem, which is sort of a structural breakdown of the public sphere as we know it. So they're trying to focus on this tiny issue. And even then, they usually misdefine it because they usually talk about disinforming content, which is not very interesting, to be honest. If we're going to talk about disinformation, much more interesting is disinforming behavior. So the use of sort of false amplification and targeting through deceptive means or deceptive actors. So you don't know who's behind something. So I think, look, nothing much new has changed in terms of content. The content's pretty much the same as it always was. There's always a lot of lies around and purposeful lies. So I think it's a very misplaced focus on disinformation, then wrongly categorized. We should be looking at disinforming technology. So is something online being spread in an organic way, or is it being spread in some sort of artificial amplification, which is disguised from you? So I don't think it's a very, very useful category, to be honest. I like all the terms are a bit loose and crappy. I've been using the term kind of authoritarian propaganda, but let me just say what I mean. I don't think disinformation itself is very good or bad, as people have always lied. It's not that interesting. What I see as malign, and it has 3 elements to it. One is that it dehumanizes others to the point of being able to murder them. So obviously the classic one is Nazis calling Jews Untermenschen, but we see it all the time in the American discourse. Yeah. Confusingly, this is known technically as extremism, but that has nothing to do with fringes. Yeah. Which is very confusing to people. And again, not a very useful definition, because when people hear extremism, they think they mean the edge. Sadly, extremism is often right in the middle of society, as it kind of is today. So technically, extremism means when you sort of start denigrating others and stripping away their humanity, and we know the consequences of that. The second really malign piece is using types of discourse or technological tricks, really, that make any kind of collaborative discourse impossible. So conspiracy theories. Ever tried arguing with a conspiracy theorist? You can't. Yeah, because they are so locked into a certain mindset. Or technically sort of swamping our world with so much confusion, lies, and doubt that nobody, can really have an argument anymore. So the destruction of collaborative discourse, which is actually the essence of democracy. We always took it for granted. We never thought about it. We have very primitive ideas about what it is, but without that ability to debate, argue, come to conclusions, democracy kind of stops being democracy as we know it. And then thirdly, it's the kind of stripping away your agency. So you need a strongman leader to do everything for you. You know, in the Trump version, this idea that I am your retribution. Like whenever you have these strongmen who are going to say, you surrender everything to me. You don't need your rights. You don't need your this is a big sort of at the sort of like, end point. You don't need your rights. You don't need your willpower to a certain extent. Just give everything to me and I will solve everything for you. So those are the three malign elements, and they've always been the same. And Nazi propaganda was built around those three. But so that's not new, but we're seeing it sort of reiterate itself in a new technological sort of dimension, which has broken down our ways of resisting this, because we all thought a bit of pluralism would solve this, or a bit of insistence on truth would stop this, or there'll be sort of checks and balances in our public sphere, and they've kind of disappeared for various reasons. And at the same time, kind of a lot of the metaphors and assumptions that we had around how the democratic public sphere would function are broken down. So ideas like the marketplace of ideas, the notion that as long as we had lots of sources, the best ideas would win out through some theory of rational choice. Seems laughable now. So we have this double crisis. We have the return of really very old form of authoritarian propaganda, but then that's coming together with this sort of digital, revolution that we're all very focused on, and that creates a very heady mix. I think that's the essence of the problem that we face, and reducing that to something as tiny as disinformation. It's kind of a form of denialism, like, oh, if only they'd stop lying. When even look at the Russian campaign in 2016 to subvert the American election. They didn't lie. They were just saying Trump good, Hillary bad. There's no disinformation there. So it's just it's a way of kind of avoiding how bad things are by focusing on this tiny issue.